everyone. Welcome to Book Chat. My name is Leslie and I'm the Reading Machine Coordinator for Monterey County Free Libraries. Today, I have a really good book to share and chat about. It's called, Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is an ebook from our collection that I checked out. It is an amazing book, and it was first published in 2014 and then made into a movie in 2019 starring Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. The book is 353 pages long, and it is really, really illuminating, inspiring, hopeful, and also really, really heartbreaking. The epigraph for this book is a quote by Reinhold Niebuhr, and it reads, "Love is the motive, but justice is the instrument." So this book is about the legal work that Bryan Stevenson, the author, has done to help prisoners on death row find whatever mercy and justice is possible in the American legal system. So as a law student, Stevenson did a lot of work with the Southern Center for Human Rights, which is an organization that represents death row inmates throughout the South. Doing this work became Stevenson's vocation, so ultimately his calling. After his graduation from Harvard, Stevenson continued working with the same organization, and eventually he got his own little kind of operation to run in Alabama. From there, he formed EJI, or the Equal Justice Initiative, which is, and this is what the website says, committed to ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the United States, challenging racial and economic justice, and protecting basic human rights for the most vulnerable people in American society. So that is largely what this book is about. This book chronicles the case of Walter McMillan, who was a black man in Alabama who was wrongly convicted for the murder of a white woman in 1986. The murder was shocking, and people were obviously really troubled by it. And for 6 months, police really had no leads on who might have committed the crime. So the public pressure on the police to solve this crime was really immense. And so their sights ended up settling on Walter McMillan. You know, this black man who worked as a logger in the community. He knew a lot of people in the community. And he was married, but he had had an affair with a white woman. And everyone knew about it because the white woman and her husband had divorced very publicly. And so Walter McMillan had become kind of like a man with a reputation. And from there, the stories about him kind of grew. So at first he was just, a black man who had the audacity to have an affair with a white woman. But from there grew stories about him being a drug dealer, which was not true. And so it became pretty easy to pin this murder on him. The police were able to find a man who was also committed of crimes in another county. They were able to take that man and put some pressure on him to get him to say that he had witnessed Walter McMillan being part of the murder of the white woman, if that makes any sense. It's kind of very convoluted. So on this basis, McMillan was arrested, and even before going to trial, he was sent to death row, where he stayed for 15 months, and that is not right. The ordeal of the trial only lasted for a day and a half, and he was easily found guilty. There were hardly any black people in the jury, and a lot of the people who could have testified as being alibis for McMillan, because he was at a church function the day the murder happened, they were not allowed to testify at the trial. Okay, so he was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And then not too long after, a trial judge used his power to override the life in prison sentence and change it to death by electrocution. So anyway, Bryan Stevenson was ultimately able to get McMillan's conviction overturned, but it did take a lot of time. It took 6 years. It took so many hearings and appeals, and but he was a free man. I mean, he was released in 1993. He had spent 7 years on death row, and then he died 20 years later as a free man in 2013 from early onset dementia that is believed to have been caused by the trauma that he suffered while he was on death row. So this book doesn't just talk about Walter McMillan's case. It also talks about some of the other cases that Stevenson has handled through EJI. Some of the prisoners he was able to win relief for, and some he wasn't, and they ended up being executed. Many of his clients have been children who never had adequate legal representation. They were put into adult prisons and left there to be abused by the other prisoners for years. So this is a book, it's really heavy. It's full of really horrific and heartbreaking examples of the American criminal justice system. But what I want to share is part of what Stevenson wrote about speaking at Walter's memorial service. I think that this captures the soul of the book really well. So I'm going to read it to you. I felt the need to explain to people what Walter had taught me. Walter made me understand why we have to reform a system of criminal justice that continues to treat people better if they are rich and guilty than if they are poor and innocent. A system that denies the poor the legal help they need, that makes wealth and status more important than culpability, must be changed. Walter's case taught me that fear and anger are a threat to justice. They can infect a community, a state, or a nation and make us blind, irrational, and dangerous. I reflected on how mass imprisonment has littered the national landscape with carceral monuments of reckless and excessive punishment and ravaged communities with our hopeless willingness to condemn and discard the most vulnerable among us. I told the congregation that Walter's case had taught me that the death penalty is not about whether people deserve to die for the crimes they commit. The real question of capital punishment in this country is, do we deserve to kill? Finally, and most important, I told those gathered in the church that Walter had taught me that mercy is just when it is rooted in hopefulness and freely given. Mercy is most empowering, liberating, and transformative when it is directed at the undeserving. The people who haven't earned it, who haven't even sought it, are the most meaningful recipients of our compassion. Walter genuinely forgave the people who unfairly accused him, the people who convicted him, and the people who had judged him unworthy of mercy. And in the end, it was just mercy towards others that allowed him to recover a life worth celebrating, a life that rediscovered the love and freedom that all humans desire, a life that overcame death and condemnation until it was time to die on God's schedule. So, that's just mercy. I cried so much while reading this book. And then, of course, when I was done, I had to watch the movie, and I cried while watching the movie too. I highly recommend it. It is heavy, but of course, I think that this is something that we need to direct our attention towards. If you're not already paying attention, then maybe you should be. That's just my opinion, but I'm always happy when I hear about something or I'm able to learn about something that I really didn't know that much about. And this was a situation that I thought I knew something about, and it turns out that I didn't know as much as I should know. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this week's book chat. Keep reading, and I will see you next time. Bye.